China.
Welcome to Conversations with Hannah, and I am here with somebody that everyone knows very well, Matt Beaton, former state rep and now our Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs. Thank you for coming tonight.
You bet.
We've been
Thanks
trying
for
to
having
schedule
me on.
this for a bit. It's not easy to get us in the same room anymore together at the same time.
Nope.
But I thought it would be great tonight to sort of talk about what you're up to.
Yeah.
I jokingly, as you know, refer to you as the Commonwealth's chief hunter, fisher, and gatherer, but you actually do have a really broad portfolio.
Yep.
So I thought folks, at home in Shrewsbury would be interested to know what you're up to and what's sort of under your purview and the size of your secretary and your budget and things like that. And then maybe we can delve into some of the different agencies that you have.
Sure, yeah. So it's the Secretariat is the Executive Office of, thank you, Executive Office of, I'm off my game, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and it is one of 8 secretariats in Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito's cabinet. And inside of that, our secretariat, we have 6 agencies, the Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Agriculture, both of which have commissioners who reside in Shrewsbury.
Yes.
The Department of Fish and Game, Department of Conservation and Recreation, the Department of Energy Resources, and the Department of Public Utilities. So 4 sort of on the environmental side of the house, 2 on the energy side of the house. And then in my capacity as secretary, I also serve as chairman of the board of the MWRA, the Quabbin Wachusett reservoirs that feed the Metro Boston area, and the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. And we also have some other, we have our MEPA office, Coastal Zone Management, and some other smaller offices inside of EEA. So we have a wide scope of on our agency work and even on our floor at EEA. And we have a budget, an annual budget. It's changing and flux every year to year, but it's about $240 million of an operational budget, and then a similar budget for our capital budget. So pretty close to $500,000. And we have, again, another number that changes frequently. As far as full-time employees, we're probably close to about 2,600. Wow. And seasonal employees, we have probably another 1,800. So a lot of folks, a lot of great employees, a lot of people doing some great work, and it's been a blast. It's been we've tackled a lot of big issues. I know we'll cover a lot of them, but the interesting part about the job is every day is different. The calendar, you wake up and look at the calendar and say, oh boy, this is going to be quite a day. But just go in and deal with all the different issues as they come, and it's really been fascinating to see the amount of the variety of things that come at us day to day, and really to also be able to get out and explore and see the beautiful places in Massachusetts that, as someone who's spent an awful lot of time outside in Massachusetts, I thought I'd maybe seen most of it. Yeah. I didn't even scratch the surface. So this has really opened my eyes to the beautiful resources we have in Massachusetts.
So we were laughing a few minutes ago because it was at the Veterans Day ceremony at Beale when you came around the corner on the phone with the governor-elect on the phone asking you to be the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So 2 years.
Yep.
Does it feel like it's been 2 years?
No, it's amazing. You said that, and it just sort of dawned on me that it was 2 years, and it's just amazing how fast the time has gone by. And it's just because every day is so busy, and there's so many things that we want to do to. A lot of reforms we've put in place, and just continuing the great mission at EEA. I'm fortunate to find myself in a position where almost every day, not every day, but almost every day I wake up excited to go to work, just because there's such a variety of things and things that I'm just personally passionate about that I love. I'm fortunate to be able to love to go to work every day.
So you referenced that you have 2 commissioners who reside in Shrewsbury. We all joke that we could all take a morning bus together to Boston from here. But we have John LeBeau, who's your Commissioner of Agriculture, correct? And then Marty Suberg, who is is his title Commissioner as
Commissioner
well?
of Department of Environmental Protection.
Both obviously great guys. I'm sure a lot of people locally know John LeBeau's name for being selectman, but Marty Suberg is also just super at his job. I've had a lot of interactions with him just in terms of dealing with folks like we together went to E.L. Harvey last year along with Marty Suberg to talk about some of the issues there. And the great thing about that interaction was just going in and talking about what some of the issues are. There wasn't a problem per se. It was just sort of from the recycling industry, here's what's going on and here's what some of the challenges are for us and here's where you are from a regulatory perspective with some of the challenges that you see. And those are really, I think, helpful conversations for folks. And similar to that, I had the honor of now serving as the minority leaders designee on the Mass Food Policy Council. Yeah. And part of what we're working on there too is the same sort of thing of, how to go in and have conversations with people who are in the food processing business or the farmers, agriculture, before there's an issue where there might be, a regulatory issue coming up, but sort of getting on the forefront of it instead of going in just from a, saying you're not doing this right anymore and you have to change or this is going to happen to you. Right. So. And that's certainly something that I think the entire Baker-Pluto administration focuses on, is really trying to be very business-friendly and proactive. But I've certainly seen that to a great extent in what your secretariat's doing. Yeah, and it's been there's been a lot of issues like that, and we're certainly trying to be proactive in how we deal with folks and the different constituencies that our secretariat touches. I'm fortunate in I talked about being able to go to work, loving it every day, and largely that is due to some great people that I have. You mentioned the two. I just actually left a meeting with the two of them on an issue, and just the collaborative nature that exists inside of EEA is really great, and that's due to just the professional nature of the people that we have on our team. So it's really been a great experience to work with folks like John and Marty and in our whole team, because everybody shares that mindset that you described of trying to partner with whether it's municipalities or industry, and all the while staying core to our mission of environmental protection and environmental advocacy. And it's been having the right people in place has made the world a difference in moving our agenda forward. And I know too, where you're at, you have federal issues. You have EPA and things like that who are sometimes even more aggressive in certain stances. So you're always trying to balance between what's going on here in our state and how to best deal with something. Tell me a little bit about what were some of your biggest challenges in the first 2 years so far in terms of issues that you've had to deal with? I know the drought, obviously, we're still in drought mode right now, as I understand it. Yeah, so I guess we came in the first couple of months and the snow started flying. Yeah. And I realized what a role some of my agencies played in... I think anyone who saw you at that first press conference... Not having slept for 3 days by the end of it. It was pretty interesting because we got thrown into the fire. We didn't even have time to develop our own internal plan of how things were going to go, so we had to make it up on the fly. We had no other choice. And dealing with a lot of those issues, Department of Conservation and Recreation owns thousands of miles of roads that it needs to take care of, and then has waterways and a lot of coastal areas that got severely impacted by storm events. And Department of Public Utilities, we work with the utilities and power outages, and that winter we had a tremendous amount of power outages, and working closely with all the partners there was a really interesting experience. And then fast forward to the summer and the effects of the drought. Not only it particularly had a very significant effect on our agricultural industry, but it also wreaked havoc in a lot of ecosystems, especially you have riverbeds drying up, and you're losing a lot of the cold water fisheries that take a decade to rebuild. So we'll be feeling the effects of this drought for a long time, even though it's raining outside today as we have this. We're still technically in a drought, and so those natural occurrences have been challenges. And then there's just the day-to-day things that pop up, and trying to come in the early days of our administration, trying to figure out what the scope of this large entity is, and move that agenda, keep the trains on the tracks, and keep the regular day-to-day business going forward, but then also push forward Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito's agenda, and try to move some pieces of legislation forward, an executive order recently signed by the governor, and create new ways of doing business, and new approaches to collecting scientific data for things like the fisheries, to support the fisheries industry. So really kind of developing our new way of doing things that supplement the great work that was in place at EEA. Well, and I know too, when the Baker-Polito administration came into office, for dealing with budget shortfalls, and so I know one of your challenges right off the bat was having to trim some of your budget, which is always difficult, especially when you're in a mid year coming in. And even last year, I know, the 2 budget cycles I've been through in the House now, there's always a lot of support for giving your secretariat more money, because there's always the feeling that you guys have, been trimmed over many years, and you're still you have the same mission and the same responsibilities, but you have less funds coming to you, and sort of what are the long-term implications of that? Because, it's similar to the conversation that we have about transportation. When you start to shortfall and you don't do the things you need to do every year, it then balloons into other things. So I know in years past, certainly around some of the conservation areas, the recreation areas, there's been an effort to have more funds put towards those. Are those some of the things that you guys have looked at in terms of the capital planning about, where you can really begin to make a difference?
Yeah, we've been trying to, just a lot of things. Create an asset inventory list of what are our actual physical assets that we own in the 450,000 acres of preserved land inside of the Department of Conservation and Recreation. That didn't exist when we came into office. So we had to create an asset inventory to then be able to develop a long-term capital strategic plan to, base a longer-term strategy on how we would use these dollars, instead of just kind of going year to year, doing patchwork approaches to dealing with capital investments. So the budget issues have been very challenging because we haven't had great revenue years since we've been in office. So there were historic cuts to agencies. So continuing, it can be difficult at times, but there was also great opportunity there too to try to find more efficiencies and try to deliver our services in a more economical and efficient way. And we've been able to make some great progress in that area. We continue to work within our means and continue to just move forward, that mission of EEA, and try to provide, come up with new innovative ways of providing those services.
One of the things, in the first term that I was in, we had many issues that legislation that impacted your agency. And certainly I think the ones that people are well aware of are, the solar bill that we dealt with for a long time, and then the hydropower and the wind, but also things like the transportation network in terms of Uber and Lyft and those things. That also comes under your purview, the Department of Public Utilities. So that was certainly one that required a lot of work to hammer out a final agreement between the House and the Senate. And how do you find sort of the sheer breadth of everything that you have to deal with on your plate, and sort of managing all of it?
Yeah, I suppose it depends on the time, that during especially the major energy bill for the import of hydro electricity and the offshore wind development, there was no one thing that took more energy and more time and more effort than working with the legislature to get a good bill done. So we had sort of a test run with the solar bill that was pretty intensive for our efforts. We got through that, and then we channeled our energies towards the larger energy bill. So energy took a lot of energy this year. It definitely took a significant amount of mine and my team's effort to make sure that we got through those things and done right, and done in a way that Governor Baker wouldn't have a problem signing either of those bills into law.
Well, and people might not be 100% familiar with why it was so important that we did both of those bills this year in terms of the amount of energy produced that's being lost. Maybe you want to talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, so solar, part of it is taking a step to try to keep a robust solar installation industry going, but also reforming and recognizing that the cost of solar installation has come way down over time, and that we spend an awful lot of money per kilowatt hour generated out of a solar panel that we do on other resources, and recognizing that there's an opportunity for us to reform the amount of money, the amount of energy subsidy money that we put towards solar, and maybe shift that towards other things and reduce that subsidy, and still be able to have that robust installation. So that process is actually ongoing. We have a solar reform through initiative going on right now at the Department of Energy Resources, and that continues. But through that, we've just been working, stakeholdering with the industry and all the different folks to try to get something that works, that really lessens the burden significantly on the ratepayers, but allows us to continue to moving towards clean energy installations across the Commonwealth. And then the bigger one was the governor's priority was hydro legislation and working with the wind industry to develop what will be the largest offshore wind development in the United States off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. Most importantly, we'll have the import of large-scale hydroelectricity up to 1,200 megawatts of that resource, and that could be supplemented with some onshore wind. But the real reason why we were chasing that is it is a reliable, dispatchable, 24 hours a day running resource that we can rely on, that is affordable, and it's also clean. It's sort of our sweet spot of clean energy that we're looking for. And that's why we made it a priority, because we have mandates under the Global Warming Solutions Act that was passed before either of our time that we are required to meet. We need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 25% by the year 2020 and 80% by the year 2050. And in order for us to do that, it's going to take a significant shift away from some of the greenhouse gas emitting fossil fuel burning resources that we relied on, largely oil and coal plants that we've done a great job of seeing mostly retire in the Commonwealth. But that baseload reliable energy, just to keep our lights on, needs to be replaced by something. And we can't rely just on solar, we can't rely just on wind or energy efficiency. It needs to be what the governor has dubbed a combo platter. And we need a diversified portfolio that allows us to make a smart transition that doesn't have negative economic consequences, because we have the 5th highest electricity in the nation in Massachusetts. So we need to live up to these legislative mandates under the Global Warming Solutions Act, while recognizing we have some of the highest cost of electricity in the nation, and also be cognizant of the fact that we need to make sure we keep the lights on, because the economic effects of brownouts and blackouts would be far greater and far more devastating. I think of the high tech in hospitals, and if these places are out of electricity for an extended period of time, there's a serious economic effect. So we just need to have a smart, balanced approach, and that's what these pieces of legislation has brought us forward. And we now for the real work and actually implementing what was in these bills.
It's always a challenge, right?
Yep.
It's not my problem anymore, because I voted on it. Now
yeah, exactly. Right. Thanks.
But I know when you come and you brief us, whether it's through different caucuses that you may be a part of. So I know you came before the Republican caucus at one point and were briefing us on the solar bill back. And one of the things that had always stuck with me is, at the time, I think you said 400 million. I think later on you thought it probably grew to 500 million. But in terms of the subsidies that go into the renewable energies, and of that, like 42% over that, 43% of it went to the solar industry, of which we got 11% of our energy. Very good. So it's really trying to bring.
Paying attention.
I always pay attention to everything you say, Matthew. Is bring it back into line. And so even when I would go out and talk to people about why it was important, really just that one sort of statement really sums up the where we're at and where we need to move to. And it really is about making sure that the industry can still move forward while also looking out for the ratepayers and make sure we're not overly subsidizing. In Massachusetts, obviously, it's an area that we've been on the leading edge of, and so when we sort of set up, how we were going to do it here, we were very aggressive in terms of trying to set up and prop up the market. And we obviously did, because it's going gangbusters from what I can tell. Every time I drive in a different area, I see a new solar farm that's being put in. So clearly we're moving, but the challenge being, when we need solar is not when it's actually really available. Exactly. And so how do you make sure that you have other renewable efforts ongoing? And I think the hydro effort was critically important, and it certainly did take a period of time to get through. And sometimes it's not on the overall conceptual idea of it, people will buy into stuff, but everyone sort of has their own philosophy then on how to actually go about doing it and what percent should we be doing hydro versus wind. And I know definitely in the House, especially for the Speaker Pro Temp, very concerned about wind and spent a lot of time working on that issue. So she was really pleased to see that go through. But my understanding is that we'll be needing to do another solar bill at some point in the future to be.
I disagree with that.
You
I
do?
know that's a legislative opinion right now. It's something that's going around. But if we can implement our reforms that we're currently working on, it's this whole net metering and the SREC values of solar, and no solar installation will occur without net metering. It's just not true. Massachusetts, as you talk about simple things to understand, we subsidize solar more than any other state in the nation. We are almost double what solar is subsidized in the state of Connecticut. And so you have to think that costs, installation costs, are pretty similar. and they have a pretty robust industry. So we have to add, we got to be honest with ourselves and saying, I know it's great.
Well,
in
I'd
the
like
industry.
to see it lessen. I'd like to see the subsidies lessen in terms.
Oh, I know
of
you're
what-
on.
yeah,
I know
yeah.
where you are on. I didn't imply that. I'm speaking more to the legislative conversation that's going on out there. That we really got to look at how much we're asking our ratepayers to pay to subsidize energy, and it's also an equity issue.
Right.
If you don't own a rooftop, and the folks that could benefit from renewable energy and not having to pay as large an energy bill can't access it because they don't own a rooftop.
Yeah.
So the folks that quite honestly can afford to make their own investment in putting solar panels up are the ones that benefit from the subsidy that every single person who pays a utility bill is paying. It's just, it's an equity, it comes down to an equity conversation, and that's part of sort of the energy justice thing that I've tried to move forward, and making sure that we're providing, if we are doing these, having these subsidies, that they're accessible to everyone.
And clearly, I mean, we just, I think, for the 6th year in a row, we're ranked as the most energy efficient state, I think tied with California.
Yep.
So clearly,
thanks to our great work, payback line.
Clearly, we're doing something right. But in addition to all the energy stuff that we focused on, we did do a bill on regulating the transportation network companies, which really grew out of sort of the Uber and the Lyft and the ride-sharing companies, really seeing a market opportunity and propping up, but also having to sort of balance that innovation that was coming out with making sure that the public safety component was dealt with. And so, that again was something that was under your secretariat, and I know you and your folks spent a lot of time on. I just returned yesterday from China with my family, and I had left my car at the State House. So after we got all our luggage and everything, I was trying to catch a cab to go to the State House to get the car to bring it back, and I had to wait quite a while for a cab. So I was rethinking my vote on the transportation network company thing after that. Yeah. But a lot of the things that go on, that we deal with legislatively and that you deal with from a regulatory perspective are things that I think sometimes people just assume is happening. You assume that the protection is in place to make sure if you're getting in a car and someone's driving, that someone has made sure that they're not on the sex offender list, that they don't have a horrible driving record. And that was really what that bill was all about, making sure those protections were in place so that the public had confidence to use those. And also, quite frankly, that insurance and things like that were also being held at levels that made sense across the board, and treating those companies in the same manner, and also not having every town make up their own rules and regulations and have that govern, because that's even more difficult for companies that, especially like a transportation company, that are going in and out of different municipalities all the time. It's very difficult if you're relying on local level. So I know the other day, I was catching up on my reading coming back, that I believe there's an agreement to actually move ahead even sooner than we provided for legislatively to start on that.
Yeah, and it's so the MOU was signed with the companies the other day, and my team was tasked with really the implementation and the follow through through the Department of Public Utilities and their transportation network, transportation division. Inside of that, we have a group that will be focused on working with the transportation network companies. And part of one of the main centerpieces that we've been working on is developing a software platform that allows us to process the background checks and all of that information that you spoke to, so we actually know who are these drivers, and getting a registration. And the interesting thing is our process and what we've developed is now going to be like the national model. Massachusetts kind of prides itself on being the first actor in a lot of things, and we're the first ones that sort of took this controversial in many ways step forward to try to have some sense of regulation around this industry, that and not stifle this industry. This is an innovative way to deliver a service that a lot of people rely on. We don't want to get in the way of that. We just want to make sure that if someone's going to hop in a car, that they're going to be safe. And we had very hard deadlines to meet, and the team did an amazing job of pulling together the software that's now being developed. It's not even being developed. It's finalized, and sort of the I's are being dotted and the T's are getting crossed of just finalizing that. And we're on our deadlines, and we'll be fully implementing the legislation shortly.
So we talked about emissions a few minutes ago, and the goals and the greenhouse. I know one of the challenges is that transportation itself is one of the biggest polluters in terms of, I know that you've been working with Secretary Pollock in terms of starting to try and address some of those things. What might we be seeing coming down the pike in terms of proposed changes or?
Yes. So the whole world is actually wrestling with what do you do about transportation. When you look at the percentage of greenhouse gases emitted by sector, transportation is not only growing percentage-wise, because we have seen dramatic decreases in the energy production area, but it's also increasing volumetrically.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that go into the greenhouse gas emissions in a year. Weather, if it's really cold, you're going to get a lot more electricity and heat generated, and gas being used to heat things. But gas prices really dictate a large amount of where the emissions coming out of the transportation industry, and the bulk of the large percentage of emissions coming out of the transportation industry around vehicles. So the easiest way to actually regulate that would be a VMT standard, a vehicle miles traveled standard, and you basically limit how much someone can drive, and then beyond that they get taxed, or there's different ways to sort of implement it. But you can imagine that's not really something that
was proposed this year.
Yes, not by us
No,
or anyone,
no.
but people proposed it, and I think we recognize how how controversial that might be, and how it doesn't really necessarily go with a lot of the philosophies I think you and I share, and certainly Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito do. So what do you do? And I think that's absent a solution like that, that's what a lot of people are wrestling with. There's going to be great efficiencies found as new federal CAFE standards kick in over the next couple of years, and we're going to see pretty significant reductions, 3 to 4 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent, which I'm sure everybody is has no idea what that means, but it's a good chunk when we're talking about trying to get to a number across all sectors of 70 million metric tons, 70.2 million metric tons. When you look at that number, that plays a pretty significant role. There's still a lot more we need to do in transportation, because it's over 40% now of the contributing factors to greenhouse gas emissions. So we're doing things within MassDOT, vehicle fleets, inside state agencies, and trying to work collaboratively with other states and other interest groups to try to find innovative solutions to try to deal with the emissions around. But one of the real keys is going to be creating the infrastructure for electric vehicles. If we can create a corridor of infrastructure for electric vehicles with other states and Canada, and as we go to a more renewable green electricity generation grid, we're now going to have the solution of greening our transportation network, because when you go to recharge your electric vehicle, it's going to be charged by clean produced energy.
I drove one last year at the State House. They had a day when the electric cars were out there, and I drove one around, and very different way of driving. You really have to adjust to sort of the gas pedal and how you deal with it, but it might be a little challenging for me because I like to go really fast.
I've noticed.
But we have no time left,
Oh, wow.
but I wanted to thank you for coming on, and also you're doing an amazing job, and just really proud to have you in this role, and to be able to see you every once in a while as you're moving 100,000 miles an hour through the State House to some meeting that you're doing to get
I'm late too.
Yes,
Yeah.
You have more than once almost run me over coming out of an elevator, but you're doing a great job, and you do have a huge responsibility, and I'm really thrilled that Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito asked you to be in this position, and keep up the great work, and looking forward to working with you in this next legislative session.
Thank you, and I am equally proud of you and the work that you're doing. The shoes weren't very big to fill, but you've done an amazing job, and I know in just talking with all my friends and former colleagues in the legislature, you're very well respected, and just seeing it and how how the door is open to you with legislative leadership and everybody, and you take a very collaborative approach, and obviously bring a great amount of intellect to what you do, and I know I'm personally very proud of the work that you're doing, and always enjoy working with you.
Well, I appreciate that, and hopefully we'll have you come on again sometime, and you can tell us about maybe some projects that you're doing in this area.
I hope so.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.